All right, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and we're going to be doing an episode of what I like to call Slow 6 Fix. So we're going to be replacing the alternator on the Cobra. If you watched my last video, this is seemingly the cause of my lean condition and part throttle, or at least that's what I'm hoping for. So we're going to get to it. Okay, so here's what we got going. This is the old alternator from my V6. This is a 6G alternator, and you can see there's a nice new pulley on it. This is from my PA performance alternator. I never used it. The V6 didn't need it. What we have here, we also have another pulley. We'll talk about that in a second. And we got our brand new KMJ 200 amp Titan series alternator. So this is supposed to be the real deal for the Cobras. This is a lifetime warranty. It should work pretty well. Everyone recommends this one, so hopefully this will work. What you're going to notice though is this is slightly different than this one. The casing is a little bigger. Supposedly it helps with cooling a little bit, and they're able to stuff a little better internals in this one. It does fit. The only difference is you got to grind a little bit off of the alternator bracket. So that shouldn't be too bad. Comes with an adapter pigtail. I also got the big 3 wiring kit. So what this is this is just upgraded wiring for your ground to chassis, and then battery ground, and then alternator to power, if I think I have that correct. And then it comes with a little fusible link here. So step 1 is get the old alternator out. So let's talk about the pulleys for a second. So this one on this old alternator is a 3.2 inch pulley. This is from Metco Motorsports, which I'm in South Carolina, and I discovered they're actually right down the road. So I was able to go pick this up from them. This is a 3.5 pulley. You're going to notice this says it's for a 6-pound lower. I do not have a 6-pound lower. So why are we putting a 3.5 pulley on the car? Well, handy dandy instructions from KMJ. You do not want to spin the alternator over 16,000 RPM. So you slide down, you're going to notice stock alternator pulley is a 2.7. It's pretty small. If you're using a 4-pound lower, do some math. A 3.5 alternator pulley gets you under the recommended 16,000 RPM. I don't really spin my car above 6,500 RPM where you see that right there. So this should be fine. I'm actually not sure what's on the car, so we'll see. But I'm probably going to have to buy a bigger belt. I think what's on the car is currently a 3.2, but we'll find out. All right, so step 1 is to just remove the battery. Simple enough. Disconnect your 2 terminals. And down in, it's hard to see, right there, there's a little bolt down in there that holds it into the tray. And then you just pull that out. So it's easy enough. All right, so then step 2, you're gonna wanna remove the belt. Easiest way to do that is get to your tensioner right over here, and then loosen that up a little bit so you can pull the belt off. And then the reason you need to take the battery out is, you'll notice, that's one of your alternator bracket bolts. So without removing the battery, that's nearly impossible to get to. All right, so we got the belt off the car, and now we need to go about removing the alternator itself. Now, once you look at it, it doesn't seem all that difficult until you realize getting it out is going to be interesting. First thing you want to do is there's going to be 2 connectors on the back side. It's hard to see. You're going to have your plug, and then my sway bar is kind of right in the way of seeing it, but there's a ground connector right about where my light is that you're going to need to remove. Now, this is where your mileage may vary. If you've watched any of my previous videos, I have this Improved Racing remote mount oil cooler set up, and I'm not sure if this is going to make my life any harder or any easier. However, I will say on your typical Cobra, without this, your oil filter is going to be right in that vicinity somewhere where my light is just shining. So that might make getting the connectors off a little more difficult, but I'm not sure how easy it is going to be to get this alternator out through here where I have these lines. I think it's probably not going to be super easy. Good news for me is that my oil filter relocation made those two connectors easier to get off. But now you're going to want to remove the two bolts holding the alternator on. So one is right where I'm pointing right here. That's going to be a 15 millimeter. And then the other one is underneath the car. I have to get that from the bottom. Right in there where my light's shining. That's going to be a 13. You're going to want to unbolt that one first so you can kind of swing the alternator a little bit. And then if everything is according to plan, we're going to need to remove the alternator bracket as well. All right, so got the bolts for the alternator out. Now we got to get out the alternator itself. So I removed that stud right there, you point my light at, to help get that bolt out. And then down in there, you're gonna find a 10 millimeter bolt for your alternator bracket. You're gonna need to loosen that up to be able to get the alternator out. All right, so we're looking for those alternator bracket bolts right there. This guy is gonna need to come out. All right, great news. I am able to get it out without having to move anything. So once you just connect those two bolts I just showed you, that'll loosen up the lower alternator bracket, and you'll be able to finagle this out relatively easily. And this does look like to be a stock unit, so not so good. And then once you get the alternator out, it's pretty clear which bolts it is you need to remove for removing the upper alternator bracket. Those two at the top, one there, and that should just drop right out. Okay, so we got the upper bracket removed. Like I said, it's this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, that bolt. They're pretty easy to see once you have the alternator off. And in the instructions from KMJ, you're going to see you're going to need to grind off a little bit of that where you kind of sharpied it in the bracket. Why? Because the alternator will hit right there since the 3G is slightly larger. So basically, right on this section right here, you're going to grind this down some right above this bolt, just a clearance for the slightly larger alternator. I'm just going to hit it with a Dremel real quick. All right, after a lot of grinding, more than I was anticipating, this should be about right here. So what you're looking for, you need to grind some of that bracket off so that you can get this relatively close to the alternator. It doesn't need to touch, but it needs to be pretty close. So I have this just loosely bolted in, and you can see I ground off a pretty good amount of all this section right here, and I think that's close enough. That's where it's touching, so if I back it up a little bit, about there, seems good. All right, so we're doing the Big 3 wire kit. So these are the instructions. What do they mean by Big 3? Basically, it's going to be your frame to engine ground, your alternator to fuse box, power wire, and then your battery to engine ground. So you're going to get, if you order it from KMJ, you can make your own if you want. You're going to get 2 of the same length ground wires with the black tape, 2 power wires from the alternator to go to the fuse box. One's shorter than the other. You can probably use either one in either direction. It doesn't really matter. And this nice little fuse holder for your alternator. So what do you do with this? Well, you follow the directions. One is going to go from the engine mount stud to the frame rail. I'll show you that. Alternator off the back to fuse box. And then one from the negative terminal or the ground on the battery to the engine bracket. So let's show you that one real quick. I hooked this one up already. Basically, you can just tie it into your factory terminal if you don't want to cut it off and put a new one on. Take this other end. This bracket right here is where you can attach this. Like so, you know, put your wire somewhere nicely out of the way and put put the rest of this bracket back on and call that a day. Now the other one, you're going to run from the fuse box down to the alternator. The alternator's not in yet. And then interestingly enough, grab my light. The last one is meant to go from the frame rail up there to this engine stud. You can see it right behind my oil pressure sensor. Interestingly enough, my factory one is non-existent. That's not a good sign. Who knows where it went, but it's not there. All right, so we got the alternator shoved up in there. Had my wife help me put this first bolt in. So all we got to do now is just bolt that lower bracket back on and then install my wiring kit, and then I got to get a new belt. It wasn't that horrible to get in there. You just kind of need an extra hand, really, to shove it up through that little hole. All right, got it in. There we go, KMJ. Got it tightened down. I just got to plug it in and then run these battery wires and put a belt on, and then we should be done. All right, so here is where we gotten as far as the big three kit. So we have this ground wire attached to that stud right below the head right there as per the instructions. I kind of looped it around over here by the radiator through this hole and fed it through here and attached it to the battery post. I'm hoping I can snug that up enough that the post won't be loose. Otherwise, I'll have to make a new little thing. And then here's the fuse holder. And you're going to use the short wire down to the alternator. And then the longer one over to the fuse box. Now, one thing I will say is trying to work with this 1 0 gauge wire. It is very unflexible. And it's a little long, honestly. If you shortened this up, you could probably just have this here and go straight to the fuse box. So that's one thing I kind of don't like. I feel like it makes the engine bay look a little messier, but it's functional. So if you want to see the underside of the car. So I decided not to remove the factory plug just to sake of ease, not having to take that wire out. You can fit both on this post. You do have to yank this wire some, bend it a little to get it on there, but it does fit. There you go. Fingers in the way. It does fit, both of them. And then this wire ends up being kind of nicely out of the way. So you're not going to catch it on your headers or anything like that, which is convenient. So I see why that one is short, but the other one is a little weird to me. And then we just got to shore everything back up here. Put my oil cooler line back where it's supposed to go. And I got to figure out somewhere to put a ground. Probably going to see if I can, use one of these holes that are already here. But yeah, this one that's supposed to be over here is missing. I'm guessing because when I bought this car, the aftermarket K-member was on it. There was a UPR one on it. So somebody probably removed it and threw it away. All right, so here's what I ended up deciding. There's a nice little bolt for this ABS wire bracket. I decided to mount my ground there. It's nice and tucked out of the way. And then you're going to see it's going to run right to that stud on the engine mount. Now, I believe it's actually supposed to be the top one that's supposed to have that stud. And it was missing the nut, but neither here nor there. It works, and it should be pretty well out of the way of everything. So this car didn't even have a ground from the frame to the engine, so I didn't notice any ill effects from that, but now we have a big one. All right, so very last thing we really need to do other than throw the battery back in is we're going to need a bigger belt. So I went from a 3.2 to a 3.5 alternator pulley. So here is the belt that was on the car. Now, if you go on Metco's website, what they suggest is each size pulley difference, you're going to need about a 1/2 inch longer belt. So I went on Gates' website, I looked at the part number, I looked at what the next one was, and that led me to the new belt. I was able to pick this up locally from O'Reilly's. there's your part number. So this should be 1/2 inch roughly longer than what is currently on there. So should work. All right. Struggled with the belt for a few minutes. Got that all back on. And just gonna slap the battery back in. Makes you a nice little tool tray right there, by the way. All right, so the other ground does not fit in between the terminal post without making it too loose. This is definitely not the suggested way to do this. This is kind of a temporary for me. I don't have any long rung terminals at the moment. So I'm probably going to end up eventually cutting this and making this a little nicer, but temporary. I took that ground that runs to the stud over there, got a longer M6 bolt. It's an M6 by 1.0, a washer and a nut, and I was able to use that to allow me to attach this to the outside. It's secure. Honestly, it won't really hurt anything, but it's kind of ugly and it's going to bother me, so I'll probably fix it eventually, but we're all finished up. All right, I know it's really loud, but got the car fired up with the KMJ. Belt seems to have not shredded itself. Beautiful 14.6.